Between the golden sands of Egypt and the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, there once thrived a world most history books have overlooked. Picture vast cities bustling with life, powerful rulers commanding armies, and cultures flourishing in the shadows of their more famous neighbors, only to vanish, leaving behind whispers in the wind. These lost kingdoms weren't just footnotes in history. They were vibrant civilizations with stories that could reshape our understanding of the ancient world. So why have they faded into obscurity? What secrets lie buried beneath the dunes, waiting to be uncovered? Think about the names we all know: Egypt with its pyramids, Mesopotamia with its ziggurats. But sandwiched between them, a tapestry of forgotten empires once wove together trade, war, and innovation. These were places where languages were spoken that no one remembers, where gods were worshipped whose names have been erased by time. Their absence from our history lessons isn't an accident. It's a mystery, one that hints at deliberate erasure, tragic collapses, or perhaps the slow erosion of memory over centuries. Today, we're setting out on a journey to reclaim these lost chapters. Imagine standing in the ruins of a palace no modern map marks, holding artifacts that defy explanation, or deciphering inscriptions that challenge everything we thought we knew. This isn't just about dust and ancient stones. It's about rediscovering the heartbeat of civilizations that shaped the world yet were written out of the story. By the end of this exploration, you'll see the ancient Middle East not as a tale of two giants, but as a vibrant mosaic of kingdoms whose legacies still echo, if only we listen closely. The desert hides more than sand. It hides truths that could change history. Are you ready to dig deeper? This fertile corridor stretching between Egypt and Mesopotamia wasn't just empty land. It was a pulsating crossroads of civilization. Imagine caravans laden with spices from the east, gold from the south, and ideas flowing in all directions, weaving together a cultural tapestry richer than we ever realized. Cities like Mari, Ebla, and Katna weren't backwaters. They were dazzling metropolises with towering temples, bustling markets, and archives filled with clay tablets detailing laws, trade agreements, and even poetry. These kingdoms didn't just survive, they thrived, acting as the middlemen of the ancient world, connecting empires and shaping the flow of history. Yet today, their names barely register in our collective memory. Part of this erasure stems from the nature of history itself, written by the victors, the survivors, the loudest voices. Egypt and Mesopotamia left behind monumental architecture and sprawling written records, while smaller kingdoms often faded into the shadows, their stories buried under layers of dust or overshadowed by their more dominant neighbors. But there's another twist. These forgotten realms often existed in the dangerous middle ground, caught in the crossfire of clashing superpowers. When empires like the Hittites or Assyrians marched to war, these buffer states were the first to be swallowed, their identities absorbed or erased entirely. Archaeology is only now piecing together their true significance. Take Ebla, for instance, a city whose royal library, discovered in the 1970s, contained over 17,000 tablets revealing a sophisticated administration and even early diplomatic ties with Egypt. Or Mari, where murals and statues depict a society with stunning artistry and complex trade networks. These weren't passive bystanders, they were innovators, diplomats, and sometimes even rivals to the giants on either side of them. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. The history we've been taught is incomplete, missing entire chapters of human ambition and ingenuity. What if these kingdoms weren't just footnotes, but key players in shaping the ancient world? Their obscurity might say less about their importance and more about the accidents of survival, which cities were sacked, which records burned, which names were chiseled away by time. Every broken seal or unearthed tablet is a clue, hinting at a far more interconnected and dynamic past than we ever imagined. The sands between the Nile and the Euphrates still hold secrets, waiting to rewrite the stories we thought we knew. Deep in the scorching expanse of the Nubian desert, where modern maps show little more than endless dunes, a forgotten kingdom once rose to astonishing power. The Kingdom of Yam wasn't just another speck on the ancient trade routes, it was a desert powerhouse, a glittering nexus of wealth that connected Africa's riches to the Mediterranean world. Egyptian texts describe caravans staggering under the weight of Yam's treasures, gold so pure it dazzled in the sunlight, ivory carved into masterpieces, and exotic woods and spices that perfumed the air. Yet for all its splendor, Yam's exact location has eluded archaeologists for centuries, turning this lost realm into one of history's most tantalizing puzzles. What makes Yam so fascinating isn't just its wealth, it's the sheer audacity of its existence. Picture a civilization thriving in what's now one of the harshest environments on Earth, turning the desert into a lifeline rather than a barrier. The Egyptians, who traded with Yam as early as 2500 BCE, wrote of its rulers as equals, not subordinates. This wasn't some remote outpost. It was a sophisticated state with enough clout to negotiate with pharaohs on eye level. But here's the mystery. If Yam was so powerful, why did it vanish so completely that even its ruins evade discovery? Recent breakthroughs are finally pulling Yam from the shadows. In 2020, archaeologists excavating a remote site in Sudan uncovered inscriptions naming Yam alongside depictions of its lavish tribute, proof that its influence stretched far beyond what scholars once assumed. Even more startling, artifacts found hundreds of miles apart suggest Yam's trade networks may have reached deep into Central Africa, rewriting the map of early commerce. This wasn't just a middleman kingdom, it was a cultural bridge blending Egyptian, Nubian, and sub-Saharan traditions in ways we're only beginning to grasp. The search for Yam's heartland continues, with each clue adding layers to its legend. Some researchers believe its capital lies buried beneath shifting sands, waiting for a storm or a satellite scan to reveal its outline. Others speculate that Yam's downfall came not from invasion but from the desert itself, a slow suffocation as climate change dried up ancient oases. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear: this desert kingdom defied the odds, building an empire where none should have been possible. Its story is a reminder that history's margins often hold the most surprising tales. If we're willing to look beyond the familiar narratives, the sands still whisper Yam's name. The question is, are we listening? While Yam's riches dazzled from the desert, another legendary kingdom captured the imagination of ancient Egypt like no other: Punt, the fabled land of the gods. To the Egyptians, Punt wasn't just a trading partner. It was a near-mythical realm of unimaginable abundance, where frankincense trees wept fragrant resin, where gold veins glittered in riverbeds, and where exotic creatures like baboons and leopards roamed freely. Pharaohs sent lavish expeditions to this distant land, carving their journeys into temple walls with pride. Yet despite these vivid accounts, Punt's true location remains one of history's most stubborn riddles, a ghost on the map that scholars still chase today. What makes Punt so extraordinary is how deeply it was woven into Egypt's identity. Imagine the scene: around 2500 BC, ships laden with ebony, myrrh, and live incense trees sailed up the Nile, gifts from Punt's rulers to the court of the pharaoh. These weren't mere transactions, they were diplomatic spectacles celebrated in art and poetry. The famous reliefs at Deir el-Bahri show Queen Hatshepsut's expedition returning with towering stacks of treasures, even depicting the Queen of Punt herself, a figure of such striking appearance that Egyptians immortalized her unique stature and features. This wasn't just commerce, it was cultural exchange on a grand scale. But why can't modern scholars pin down this glittering kingdom? Part of the mystery lies in the vagueness of ancient records. Egyptian texts describe Punt as lying to the southeast, a direction that could point to the Horn of Africa, the southern Arabian Peninsula, or even a combination of both. Some argue for Eritrea or Somalia, where frankincense trees still grow wild, matching ancient descriptions. Others point to Yemen, where archaeological finds reveal advanced cultures trading incense as early as 3000 BC. There's a tantalizing third theory that Punt wasn't a single place at all, but a network of ports and hubs spanning both sides of the Red Sea, a fluid zone of exchange defying modern borders. Recent discoveries have only deepened the intrigue. Genetic studies of baboons mummified in Egypt trace their origins to modern-day Eritrea, hinting at one possible heartland for Punt's exotic animal trade. Meanwhile, pottery fragments found along the Arabian coast bear striking similarities to Egyptian designs, suggesting far more back and forth than we once assumed. The truth may be even more complex. Punt could have been a shifting concept, its location changing over centuries as trade routes evolved and new alliances formed. The enigma of Punt forces us to rethink how ancient civilizations connected. This wasn't just about goods moving from A to B, it was about knowledge, beliefs, and even people flowing across vast distances. When Egyptians called Punt the land of the gods, they weren't just flattering a trade partner. They were acknowledging a place woven into their cosmology, a source of sacred materials used in temples and embalming rituals. The incense that perfumed their ceremonies, the gold that adorned their statues, these weren't just imports. They were threads tying distant worlds together, proof that even in antiquity, globalization was already at work. Punt's legacy lingers in the unanswered questions it leaves behind. Every broken amphora or faded inscription could hold the key to finally locating this elusive kingdom. But perhaps its true lesson is simpler. Some places matter less as dots on a map and more as ideas, living proof that even in a world without satellites or ships, humanity found ways to reach across deserts and seas, building bridges between worlds we're only now beginning to understand. While Egypt obsessed over Punt's riches and Yam ruled the desert, another powerhouse rose in the shadows, one that reshaped warfare itself. The Mitanni Empire didn't just control northern Mesopotamia, they perfected the art of chariot combat, turning horse-drawn vehicles into the tanks of the ancient world. Picture bronze-clad warriors thundering across the plains, their wheeled platforms manned by drivers and archers moving in terrifying unison. This wasn't just military innovation, it was a revolution that forced even Egypt's pharaohs to take notice. Yet despite their dominance, Mitanni's story ends not with a slow fade, but with a sudden collapse so complete that scholars still debate what went wrong. What set Mitanni apart wasn't just brute force, it was strategy. Their chariots weren't lone skirmishers, they moved in coordinated squadrons, with specially bred horses trained to pivot at a moment's notice. Egyptian records describe these forces with something between awe and dread, noting how Mitanni's archers could loose arrows while circling an enemy at full speed. But the empire's real genius lay in diplomacy. When tensions with Egypt flared, Mitanni didn't just send armies, they sent princesses. A series of royal marriages, including the famed union between Pharaoh Amenhotep III and Mitanni Princess Jilakhepa, turned potential wars into alliances sealed with gold and kinship. For nearly 2 centuries, this blend of martial might and political savvy made Mitanni the broker of balance in the ancient Near East. So how does an empire this sophisticated vanish almost overnight? The cracks began with a familiar threat, the Hittites. As this rival power grew bolder, Mitanni found itself squeezed between Hittite expansion from the north and Assyrian resurgence from the east. Then came the betrayal. A puppet ruler installed by the Hittites sparked civil war, fragmenting Mitanni's unity at the worst possible moment, but the final blow may have been more subtle. Clay tablets from the period hint at droughts disrupting the horse-breeding heartlands, weakening Mitanni's greatest military asset. Within generations, their language Hurrian faded into obscurity, their cities were repurposed by conquerors, and their chariot tactics became relics studied by enemies. Yet traces of Mitanni's legacy endure. The famous Amarna letters, a trove of diplomatic correspondence, reveal how their kings negotiated as equals with Egypt and Babylon. Even their chariot designs lived on, copied by armies across the region. Most haunting of all are the scattered Hurrian phrases preserved in Hittite rituals, whispers of a culture that once commanded empires. Mitanni's fall reminds us that even the mightiest civilizations can unravel swiftly, victims of shifting alliances, environmental pressures, and the relentless tide of rivals waiting in the wings. Their story isn't just about loss, it's a warning etched in cuneiform about the fragile nature of power. Long before the Mitanni chariots thundered across the plains, the Hurrians were quietly weaving together a cultural tapestry that would outlast empires. Unlike the flashy superpowers of their time, they didn't rely on towering monuments or vast conquests to make their mark. Instead, their genius lay in assimilation, blending Mesopotamian gods with Anatolian rituals, adopting Babylonian cuneiform while preserving their own lyrical language, and creating a society where diverse traditions didn't just coexist but enriched one another. Their homeland stretched from the rugged highlands of eastern Turkey to the bustling trade hubs of northern Syria, acting as a bridge between worlds that historians are only now beginning to appreciate. What made the Hurrians truly extraordinary was their ability to absorb without disappearing. Take their pantheon. They worshipped Mesopotamian deities like Ishtar, but gave them Hurrian names and local twists. Their storm god, Teshub, became so influential that even the Hittites, who later conquered much of their territory, adopted him as their own. Then there's the Hurrian language itself, unrelated to any major linguistic family around it, yet preserved in clay tablets filled with everything from legal contracts to what might be the world's oldest surviving sheet music. Imagine that, a hymn to the goddess Nickel, composed over 3,400 years ago, its musical notation deciphered by modern scholars and performed again after millennia of silence. Their cultural fingerprints are hiding in plain sight today. The city of Urkesh, once a major Hurrian center in modern-day Syria, reveals a palace with stone foundations inscribed in both Akkadian and Hurrian, a deliberate statement of dual identity. Even the name of modern Diyarbakir in Turkey may trace back to a Hurrian root, a whisper of their enduring presence, but perhaps their most unexpected legacy lies in mythology. Scholars have spotted striking parallels between Hurrian epic cycles and later Greek tales, suggesting that stories like the struggle between the storm god and the sea might have traveled westward, evolving into the myths we now associate with Zeus and Poseidon. The Hurrians challenge our obsession with history's winners. They thrived not through dominance but through cultural fluidity, leaving behind a legacy that seeped into the DNA of every civilization they touched. When their political power faded, their ideas didn't. Like invisible ink on parchment, their influence only becomes visible when held up to the light of deeper scrutiny, proof that some of history's most transformative forces aren't the loudest, but the ones that linger in the spaces between. While the Hittites carved their empire across Anatolia, another power rose in the West Arzawa, a kingdom shrouded in mystery yet fierce enough to challenge even the mightiest rulers of the ancient world. Picture a land of rugged mountains and fertile valleys, where a people speaking a language unrelated to their neighbors forged a culture entirely their own. The Hittites called them rebels, rivals, and sometimes even equals, their texts oscillating between grudging respect and outright hostility. But what makes Arzawa truly fascinating isn't just its defiance, it's how thoroughly it vanished, leaving behind only fragments of its story in the archives of its enemies. Arzawa's defiance of Hittite dominance wasn't just political, it was cultural. While the Hittites worshipped a pantheon led by the storm god Teshub, Arzawa's deities bore names like Tarhunt, a possible precursor to later Lewian and even Greek gods. Their language, known only through fleeting references in Hittite diplomatic letters, remains largely undeciphered, a linguistic puzzle waiting to be solved. Even their borders are debated, though clay tablets mention key cities like Apasa, likely the precursor to later Ephesus, suggesting a realm stretching along Turkey's Aegean coast. This wasn't some minor principality. It was a regional power capable of sheltering Hittite political exiles and negotiating treaties as a sovereign state. Then, around 1200 BC, Arzawa's flame flickered out. The usual suspects, climate change, invasions, internal strife, all play a role, but there's a twist. Unlike other Bronze Age collapses, Arzawa's downfall might have been accelerated by its own success. As the Hittite Empire weakened, Arzawa's rebellious vassals and splinter groups, like the enigmatic Seher Riverland, may have fragmented their unity at the worst possible moment. Hittite texts speak of a great revolt where Arzawan cities rose in unison, only to crumble under the weight of their own ambition. Yet Arzawa's legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Some scholars trace the origins of later Anatolian kingdoms like Lydia back to Arzawan refugees, suggesting their cultural DNA survived the Bronze Age's chaotic end. Even the name Asia might derive from Asuwa, a term linked to Arzawa's broader sphere of influence. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't just a lost kingdom, but a missing link in the story of how ancient Anatolia's diverse cultures shaped the classical world. The silence surrounding Arzawa isn't an absence, it's an invitation to listen harder to the whispers between the lines of Hittite clay. Nestled in the storm-swept highlands where modern Turkey meets Syria, the Kingdom of Kizuwatna carved out a legacy far greater than its size. This wasn't just another minor state caught between empires. It was a sacred melting pot where Hittite warlords bowed to Hurrian priests, where treaties were sealed not just with oaths but with shared rituals. Imagine a land where diplomacy and divinity intertwined, where kings sought blessings from local gods before marching to war, and where scribes drafted agreements so meticulous they'd put modern contracts to shame. Kizuwatna's story survives in fragments, cracked clay tablets detailing alliances, curses invoked against treaty breakers, and whispers of a queen who negotiated as deftly as any general. What set Kizuwatna apart was its role as a bridge between worlds. Geographically, it connected the Hittite heartland to the riches of northern Syria. Culturally, it blended the storm gods of Anatolia with the celestial deities of Mesopotamia, creating a unique spiritual tapestry. But its true mastery lay in statecraft. When the Hittites' history's ultimate hard power demanded loyalty, Kizuwatna's rulers didn't just submit. They negotiated terms that preserved their autonomy, their temples, even their right to mediate disputes between greater powers. The surviving treaty between King Pilia of Kizuwatna and the Hittite monarch Zidanta II reads less like a surrender and more like a corporate merger, with clauses guaranteeing mutual defense, extradition of fugitives, and perhaps most tellingly, equal punishment for subjects of either kingdom who broke the peace. The ruins of Kamani, Kizuwatna's likely capital, hint at why both gods and kings favored this place. Excavations reveal sprawling sanctuaries where offerings from across the ancient Near East piled up Egyptian faience beads, Babylonian cylinder seals, silver votives shaped like Hittite chariots. This was no backwater. It was a pilgrimage site where empires came to seek favor from the powerful deity known as the Lady of Kizuwatna. Even the Hittites, despite their military might, recognized the spiritual authority radiating from these highland temples. Their texts speak of kings making arduous journeys to consult Kizuwatna's oracles before launching major campaigns, proving that soft power, the kind wielded through religious prestige and diplomatic finesse, could bend even the mightiest empires to its will. Kizuwatna's downfall holds eerie parallels to our own era of shifting alliances. As Hittite power waned in the 12th century BCE, the kingdom found itself squeezed between rising Assyrian aggression and internal fractures. But the final blow may have been ecological tree ring data from the region shows a prolonged drought, crippling the agriculture that fed both Kizuwatna's people and its political influence. Yet in its collapse, the kingdom left an unexpected gift, the so-called Kizuwatna rituals, a collection of spells and purification rites so effective that Hittite scribes copied them for generations. Even in ruin, this small kingdom's ideas endured, woven into the fabric of empires that outlasted it. The lesson of Kizuwatna isn't just about ancient politics, it's about the delicate dance between hard and soft power. Here was a kingdom that leveraged its spiritual capital and diplomatic savvy to punch above its weight, navigating a world of superpowers with the finesse of a seasoned negotiator. Its treaties weren't mere scraps of clay, they were blueprints for survival in an unforgiving age, proving that sometimes the quietest voices craft the most enduring rules. As archaeologists sift through Kamani's dust, they're not just uncovering a lost kingdom, they're rediscovering an ancient art of balance, one that feels remarkably relevant in our own fractured world. Before Persia's rise to glory, another empire dominated the rugged landscapes of southwestern Iran, one that refused to be swallowed by Mesopotamia's shadow. The Elamites weren't just neighbors to the Babylonians and Assyrians. They were rivals, equals, and sometimes conquerors, crafting a civilization so distinct that even their language stands isolated in history, unrelated to any known tongue. Picture the ziggurats of Susa, their glazed bricks shimmering with cobalt and gold, or the intricate seals depicting lion hunts and divine processions, artifacts that reveal a culture blending Mesopotamian influences with something entirely its own. This was a kingdom where scribes wrote not just in borrowed cuneiform, but in their own enigmatic script, where kings styled themselves as shepherds of the people, centuries before Persian rulers adopted the same metaphor. Elam's true genius lay in its ability to adapt without losing its identity. Take their legal system. While Hammurabi's famous code gets all the attention, Elamite contracts from the same period show startling sophistication, with clauses protecting women's property rights and detailed inheritance rules. Their artisans pioneered techniques like lost wax bronze casting, creating statues so lifelike they seem to breathe across millennia. Then there's the matter of warfare. Elam didn't just resist Mesopotamian armies, it launched daring campaigns of its own. In the 12th century BCE, Elamite forces sacked Babylon itself, hauling away treasures including the iconic stele of Naram-Sin, a trophy so symbolic it was like stealing a nation's soul. Yet for all its power, Elam's downfall came not from external conquest, but from a slow unraveling. As Assyria grew stronger, Elam found itself caught in a geopolitical vise, its once lucrative trade routes choked off by rising rivals. Internal divisions between highland and lowland factions weakened its cohesion, while shifting river courses, a recurring curse of ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, turned fertile fields into salt-ridden wastelands. By the time Persia's Cyrus the Great rose to power, Elam had faded into a vassal state, its cities repurposed as provincial capitals of a new empire. But to write Elam off as a mere precursor to Persia is to miss its enduring legacy. Those glazed bricks from Susa, they inspired the palatial decorations of Persepolis. Elamite administrative practices became the backbone of Achaemenid governance, and their language persisted as an official tongue of the Persian Empire centuries after Elam's political demise. Even today, genetic studies suggest the Elamites' descendants may walk the streets of modern Iran, their DNA woven into the region's living tapestry. The lesson here isn't just about a forgotten empire, it's about how civilizations never truly vanish. They transform, merge, and resurface in ways that defy simple narratives of rise and fall. Elam's story reminds us that history's so-called footnotes often hold the keys to understanding the main plot. The fall of the Akkadian Empire wasn't just another regime change, it was a cataclysm that echoed across centuries. Imagine the scene. Around 2200 BCE, warriors from the rugged Zagros Mountains, known to history only as the Guti, descended like a storm upon Mesopotamia's plains. These weren't the disciplined armies of a rival empire, but fierce tribesmen who fought with a ferocity that shattered the world's first great kingdom. The Akkadian rulers, who had united city-states from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, found their meticulously organized bureaucracy collapsing under the weight of lightning raids and scorched earth tactics. In a matter of years, the very concept of centralized power in Mesopotamia seemed like a relic of a lost golden age. Yet the Guti's reign, often dismissed as a mere dark age, was far more complex than simple destruction. Yes, their rule was short, lasting barely a century, and yes, later Babylonian scribes painted them as barbaric outsiders. But dig deeper and a surprising pattern emerges. The Guti didn't erase Akkadian culture, they absorbed it, appointing local officials to maintain day-to-day governance even as they held ultimate power. Their greatest legacy might be what they didn't do. Unlike later conquerors, they didn't impose a new language or religion, allowing Mesopotamian traditions to survive beneath the surface. This restraint created a vacuum, one that would ultimately give rise to the legendary Third Dynasty of Ur, a renaissance that borrowed from both Akkadian innovations and the hard lessons of Guti rule. What's truly fascinating is how their invasion may have reshaped Mesopotamia's political DNA. Before the Guti, empires relied on sheer military might. After them, rulers like Ur-Nammu understood that lasting power required something more: legal codes to ensure fairness, infrastructure to bind cities together, and a narrative of legitimacy that went beyond the sword. The Guti, unintentionally, became the foil against which later dynasties defined themselves, proof that chaos could only be overcome by building institutions robust enough to outlast any single ruler. Archaeology hints at another twist. The Guti might not have been the sole architects of Akkad's fall. Tree ring data from the era reveals crippling droughts, while clay tablets speak of crippling grain shortages and cities abandoned due to failing irrigation systems. The Guti didn't just exploit weakness, they arrived amid a perfect storm of environmental and social collapse. Their invasion wasn't the cause of Mesopotamia's unraveling. It was the final blow to a system already teetering on the edge. The lesson here isn't just about ancient history. It's about how periods of disruption, even violent ones, can become catalysts for reinvention. The Guti didn't set out to pave the way for Ur's glory, but their chaotic interlude forced Mesopotamia to rebuild smarter, stronger, and with a resilience that would carry its culture forward for millennia. Sometimes history's most transformative moments come not from grand designs, but from the unpredictable collision of ambition, crisis, and the raw forces of change. The Amorites weren't supposed to reshape history. They began as wandering herders, drifting along the fringes of Mesopotamia with their flocks, dismissed by city dwellers as uncouth outsiders. Yet within generations, these nomads didn't just enter the pages of history. They rewrote them, founding dynasties that would echo for millennia, their greatest achievement. Babylon itself, that glittering symbol of ancient power, rose from Amorite ambition. But their story isn't just about conquest, it's about how outsiders can become insiders, transforming entire civilizations in the process. What set the Amorites apart was their genius for adaptation. Unlike the Gutians before them, who ruled through brute force, the Amorites absorbed the best of Mesopotamian culture while imprinting their own innovations. When they seized control of cities like Larsa, Isin, and eventually Babylon, they didn't burn libraries or smash temples. They studied cuneiform tablets, mastered irrigation techniques, and married into local elite families. Their most famous king, Hammurabi, didn't just borrow legal concepts, he refined them into his iconic law code, carving judgments in stone so they'd endure, like the sun and moon. This wasn't cultural theft, it was evolution, blending Amorite tribal traditions with urban sophistication in ways no one expected. Archaeology reveals how deeply their nomadic roots influenced their rule. Excavations at Mari, a key Amorite city, uncovered sprawling palaces with courtyards designed like desert encampments, spaces where leaders could receive tribal elders beneath open skies, maintaining the intimacy of tent gatherings even within mud-brick walls. Their administrative texts show meticulous records of livestock movements, a legacy of their pastoral past. Even their pantheon honored gods of steppes and storms alongside Mesopotamian deities, creating a hybrid spirituality that reflected their journey from margins to center. The secret to their success, flexibility. While rigid empires crumbled, the Amorites thrived by balancing central authority with local autonomy. Tribal leaders became governors, customary laws were codified rather than erased, and trade routes once viewed with suspicion by city-states were expanded into networks stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley. When drought or rebellion threatened one region, their decentralized system allowed others to flourish, an early lesson in resilient governance that future empires would spend centuries trying to replicate. Yet their most enduring legacy might be the simplest, proof that civilization isn't born in isolation. The Amorites remind us that cultures grow strongest when they welcome outside influences, when nomads and city dwellers exchange more than just goods, when they share ideas. The next time you picture Babylon's hanging gardens or hear Hammurabi's name, remember they sprang from the dreams of wanderers who dared to imagine a different world. The Kassites slipped into history almost unnoticed, a people without fanfare or epic origin stories. Unlike the flashy Amorites or the warlike Gutians, they arrived in Babylon not with a thunderous conquest, but with a quiet persistence that would outlast every other dynasty. Their homeland, a mystery somewhere in the rugged Zagros Mountains, where their language, unrelated to any Mesopotamian tongue, hints at distant roots we can only guess at. Yet for 4 centuries, these enigmatic rulers held sway over Babylon, not through brute force, but through something far more enduring: cultural fusion. What makes the Kassites fascinating isn't just their longevity, it's how little they tried to erase. When they took power around 1500 BCE, they didn't impose their language or gods atop Babylon's glittering legacy. Instead, they became its guardians. Temples to Marduk still rose, scribes continued writing in Akkadian, and the Epic of Gilgamesh was copied anew. But beneath this continuity, subtle shifts emerged. Kassite art introduced vibrant new styles, glazed tiles depicting mythical beasts, boundary stones called kuduris etched with intricate symbols of gods and constellations. Even their horses, once rare in Mesopotamia, became status symbols, their sleek forms immortalized in terracotta plaques. The silence of Kassite records is deceptive. While few royal inscriptions survive, their influence whispers through archaeology. At Ur-Kurigalzu, a city built by King Kurigalzu I, towering ziggurats blended Babylonian grandeur with Kassite innovations like vaulted brick archways. Their diplomacy left traces. 2 letters from Egyptian pharaohs address Kassite kings as brothers, proof they moved comfortably in the era's great power circle. Most telling are the economic tablets, meticulous records of land grants, trade in lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and even a startling early mention of glassmaking. This wasn't a dark age. It was a period of quiet prosperity where Babylon's heartbeat steadied under rulers who valued stability over conquest. Yet their greatest legacy might be what they didn't do. When Elamite armies finally sacked Babylon around 1200 BCE, ending Kassite rule, the city didn't collapse into chaos. The systems they'd nurtured, fair land distribution, temple economies, cross-cultural trade, left Babylon resilient enough to rise again. The Kassites vanish from history as quietly as they entered, but their lesson lingers. Sometimes the most transformative rulers aren't those who shout their triumphs from palace walls, but those who weave their threads so deeply into the fabric of a civilization that even their names fade before their influence does. The ruins of Ur-Kurigalzu stand today not as monuments to conquest, but to the power of endurance, proof that history's quietest dynasties can echo the loudest. The Mediterranean world of 1200 BC was a tapestry of thriving empires until it wasn't. Almost overnight, cities that had stood for centuries went up in flames. The Hittite capital Hattusa was abandoned, Mycenaean palaces crumbled, and even Egypt, though victorious, emerged battered from the onslaught. Ancient scribes pointed to a single, shadowy culprit, the Sea Peoples. But these weren't just another wave of invaders. Recent discoveries paint a far more complex picture, one of desperation, not destruction for its own sake. Imagine a time of climate chaos. Tree rings from this period tell a story of prolonged droughts and failed harvests across the Mediterranean. Now picture entire populations uprooted, fleeing famine by any means necessary. The so-called Sea Peoples might not have been a unified army, but a mosaic of displaced communities: Lewians from Anatolia, Sardinians, Sicilians, even Aegean islanders pushed to the brink. Egyptian reliefs at Medinet Habu depict their families traveling with them, ox carts loaded with possessions, suggesting migration, not just raiding. Their attacks on coastal cities may have been acts of survival, attempts to carve out new homelands from the ruins of collapsing states. What's striking is how differently empires responded. The Hittites, already strained by internal divisions and dwindling grain supplies, fractured under the pressure. By contrast, Egypt under Ramses III adapted. His naval innovations, ships with raised decks for archers, harbor fortifications, show a military pivot to meet this unprecedented threat. But even his victory inscriptions hint at grudging respect, naming specific Sea Peoples groups like the Peliset, who later settled in Canaan and became the Philistines of biblical fame. This wasn't mindless violence, it was the birth pangs of a new world order. Archaeology adds layers to the story. At sites like Ugarit in Syria, hastily buried hoards of gold and bronze suggest people hoped to return after the storm passed. They never did, yet in Sardinia, Nuragic culture flourished around this time, their distinctive tower-building tradition untouched. Could some sea peoples have been Sardinians returning home after failed ventures abroad? The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't an invasion, it was a chain reaction of human movement, set off by ecological catastrophe. The Sea People's legacy endures in unexpected ways. Their disruption cleared space for smaller kingdoms like the Phoenicians to rise, pioneers of the alphabet we use today. Perhaps their greatest lesson is that history's most feared, barbarians, are often just people caught in currents beyond their control, reshaping the world not through malice but through the universal will to survive. The Philistines have long been cast as the brutish villains of the Hebrew Bible, uncircumcised giants like Goliath, oppressors of the Israelites, but archaeology paints a startlingly different picture. These weren't just barbaric warmongers, they were master craftsmen, savvy traders, and bearers of a culture that bridged continents. Take their pottery, delicate, asymmetrical flasks called Philistine by chrome, adorned with birds and fish, their designs echoing styles from Cyprus and the Aegean. Or their olive oil industry, so advanced that Tel Mikni, likely the Philistine city of Ekron, housed over 100 presses capable of producing thousands of gallons annually, ancient factory-scale production. DNA studies now confirm what pottery hints at. Skeletal remains from Ashkelon, a key Philistine site, carried genetic markers linking them to southern Europe, likely from migrations around 1200 BC. This wasn't a small influx, it was a demographic wave that reshaped Canaan's coastal culture. Yet the real surprise lies in how quickly the Philistines blended local traditions with their own. Within 2 centuries, their pottery styles absorbed Canaanite influences, their diet shifted to include more Middle Eastern grains, and their temples began honoring Semitic deities alongside Aegean ones like Potnios, a version of the Greek Poseidon. Their cities reveal a society far more nuanced than biblical accounts suggest. At Gath, home of the legendary Goliath, archaeologists uncovered a massive iron forge, evidence that the Philistines weren't just using this revolutionary metal, they were innovating with it. Meanwhile, their feasting practices, revealed by animal bones and wine stains in elite homes, suggest a culture that valued diplomacy as much as combat. Even their supposed uncivilized reputation crumbles under scrutiny. At Ashdod, flush toilets and drainage systems predate Roman engineering by nearly a millennium. Why does this matter? Because the Philistines embody history's uncomfortable truth. The line between us and them is often drawn by the victors. When Assyria crushed their cities in the 8th century BC, the survivors didn't vanish. They assimilated, their DNA and ideas weaving into the fabric of the region. Today, the name Palestine itself echoes their legacy, a reminder that civilizations rarely disappear completely. They transform, leaving traces in our languages, our technologies, even our myths. The Philistines challenge us to look beyond caricatures, to see the vibrant humanity behind history's so-called villains. Beneath Cyprus's sun-baked hills lay the secret to Alashiya's power, copper, the lifeblood of the Bronze Age. This wasn't just any metal, it was the essential ingredient for weapons, tools, and the very infrastructure of empires. Alashiya's mines produced copper so pure that its ingots, shaped like stretched ox hides, became the standard currency of international trade. Ships laden with these gleaming bars sailed to Egypt's delta and Mesopotamia's ports, returning with silver, ivory, and lapis lazuli. But Alashiya's true genius wasn't just extraction, it was diplomacy. Letters discovered in Amarna reveal how its kings addressed pharaohs as brother. a term reserved for equals while skillfully playing rival powers against each other to maintain independence. One remarkable tablet captures this balancing act. When the Hittites demanded allegiance, Alashiya's ruler replied with flattery and a shipment of copper to keep the king's favor. To Egypt, he lamented raids by mysterious sea peoples, subtly positioning his kingdom as a vulnerable ally worthy of protection. These weren't desperate pleas, they were masterclasses in geopolitical chess, leveraging resources and threats to carve out autonomy. Even Alashiya's language remains tantalizingly elusive. Clay tablets mix Akkadian diplomatic phrases with undeciphered local script, suggesting a culture both cosmopolitan and fiercely distinct. Yet by 1200 BC, the letters stop. Excavations at Nkomi, likely Alashiya's capital, show layers of destruction, collapsed walls, workshops abandoned mid-smelt. The usual suspects emerge: earthquakes, pirate raids, or the wider Bronze Age collapse. But there's a twist. Unlike other fallen kingdoms, Alashiya's copper trade didn't vanish, it shifted. New smelting sites sprouted along Cyprus's southern coast, operated not by centralized rulers but by independent merchants. Some scholars argue Alashia didn't so much fall as transform, its wealth dissolving from royal coffers into private hands as the era of grand palaces waned. The island's later history hints at an even deeper legacy. When Greek colonists arrived centuries later, they adopted local Cypriot gods like the smithing deity identified with Hephaestus, a possible echo of Alashiya's copper working traditions. The kingdom's true end may not have been destruction but diffusion, its expertise and culture seeping into the Mediterranean's bloodstream until its origins were forgotten. Today, as archaeologists analyze trace elements in copper artifacts worldwide, they're mapping Alashiya's invisible web of influence, proof that some kingdoms outlived their names, enduring not in stone or text, but in the very tools that built the ancient world. While the Hittites built their empire on rigid hierarchy, the Lewians took a different path, one that may have saved them from history's wreckage. Picture a network of city-states stretching from Turkey's western coast to northern Syria, each speaking the same language but answering to no single king. Their resilience wasn't just luck, it was design. When drought or invaders crippled centralized powers like the Hittites, Lewian communities simply adapted, their loose alliances acting as shock absorbers against collapse. Evidence of their ingenuity survives in the very stones they left behind. At Karat, a remote hilltop fortress in southern Turkey, bilingual inscriptions in Phoenician and Lewian hieroglyphs, once considered mere decorative symbols, proved to be a Rosetta Stone for deciphering their script. These weren't just royal boasts, they were legal codes, treaties, even poetic hymns, revealing a society that valued law and art as much as warfare. Unlike the Hittites' tightly controlled cuneiform archives, Lewian writings appear on cliff faces, city gates, and drinking vessels, suggesting literacy wasn't confined to elite scribes. Their architectural legacy tells an even richer story. Walk through the ruins of Hattusa after its fall, and you'll find Lewian masons rebuilding atop the rubble, repurposing Hittite lion gates into new fortifications. At Troy, yes, that Troy, recent excavations reveal Lewian-style pottery layers beneath Homer's legendary city, hinting that these forgotten people may have shaped the stage for one of history's most enduring myths. What truly set the Lewians apart was their cultural fluidity. While empires fought to impose uniformity, Lewian city-states like Carchemish and Malatya absorbed influences from Assyrian traders, Hurrian priests, and even Aegean refugees, blending them into something uniquely their own. A single relief might show a Hittite storm god standing beside a Phoenician-style sphinx, all labeled in Lewian script, a visual manifesto of adaptability. Their survival strategy holds eerie relevance today. When climate change dried up trade routes, Lewian cities pivoted to local agriculture. When the Sea Peoples raided coasts, inland communities sheltered displaced craftsmen, preserving skills like ironworking that would later fuel the Iron Age. Unlike the Hittites, who vanished when their capital fell, the Lewians endured by being disposable. No single city was irreplaceable. The quiet persistence of their language tells the final chapter. Long after the Hittite Empire crumbled, Lewian dialects survived in pockets like Alashia and Cilicia, shaping place names and even influencing early Greek. Today, as linguists trace loanwords between Lewian and Armenian, they're uncovering a cultural bridge spanning millennia. The Lewians didn't just outlast empires, they became the glue holding together a fractured world, proving that sometimes the most powerful civilizations are the ones that refuse to be centralized. On the Syrian coast, where the Mediterranean meets the Fertile Crescent, Ugarit thrived as the beating heart of Bronze Age commerce, a city so vital that its destruction became the defining symbol of an entire era's collapse. Unlike the monumental ruins of Egypt or Mesopotamia, Ugarit's magic lies in its intimacy. Walk its excavated streets today, and you're not just seeing palaces or temples, but bakeries with charred loaves still in ovens, scribble schools with practice tablets covered in clumsy student handwriting, even private letters between merchants complaining about late shipments. This wasn't just a city frozen in time. It was a living, breathing community whose abrupt end preserved snapshots of ordinary life you won't find in royal annals or victory steels. The real treasure of Ugarit isn't gold or grand architecture, it's words. In a cramped scribble workshop, archaeologists uncovered clay tablets bearing something revolutionary, the world's first alphabet. Unlike Mesopotamia's complex cuneiform or Egypt's hieroglyphs, this system used just 30 simple signs to represent sounds, a breakthrough that democratized writing. Suddenly, merchants could keep their own records, soldiers send home letters, and poets compose epics without years of scribble training. The tablet containing the alphabets, ABCs, even includes a teacher's note, evidence that literacy was spreading beyond elite circles. But Ugarit's scribes didn't stop there. Their libraries held everything from diplomatic treaties with Hittite kings to haunting prayers for protection against the looming threat of the Sea Peoples, creating a paper trail of a society sensing its own vulnerability. Trade was Ugarit's lifeblood, and its ruins tell tales of connections spanning the ancient world. Cypriot copper, Mycenaean pottery, Baltic amber all passed through its harbors. One particularly vivid invoice lists shipments of purple dye, a commodity so valuable it was weighed in shekels of gold. Yet beneath this prosperity, signs of strain emerge. Letters from the city's last days beg Egypt for grain as droughts crippled harvests, while others warn of strange ships sighted along the coast. The final layer of excavation is a sobering time capsule. Collapsed buildings with skeletons still clutching valuables, half-packed carts abandoned in courtyards, and a lone tablet left unfinished mid-sentence, likely the moment invaders breached the gates. What makes Ugarit's fall so poignant is how ordinary its last days were. There's no evidence of internal decay or mismanagement, just a thriving city caught in a perfect storm of climate change, seismic unrest, and unprecedented migration. Its ruins challenge the myth that civilizations collapse from moral failure or weakness. Sometimes, even the most vibrant societies stand no chance against forces beyond their control. Yet in its ashes, Ugarit left a paradoxical gift, the very alphabet that would outlive its destroyers, adopted and adapted by Phoenician traders to become the ancestor of the letters you're reading right now. The city perished, but its voice never truly fell silent. The Arameans didn't set out to conquer empires, they conquered communication itself. Emerging from the arid fringes of Syria around 1200 BC, these nomadic herders possessed no vast armies or towering monuments. What they had was something far more enduring, a language so adaptable that it would become the voice of kings, merchants, and even the Bible. Aramaic didn't spread by the sword, it spread by necessity, weaving itself into the fabric of daily life across the ancient Near East until even Persian emperors, who ruled from India to Ethiopia, adopted it as their empire's official tongue. Their rise began with geography and grit. Nestled between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean, the Arameans turned their homeland into a crossroads for caravans carrying everything from Arabian incense to Anatolian silver. Unlike rigid imperial bureaucracies, their trade networks were fluid, built on kinship ties and mutual trust rather than forced tribute. At the bustling oasis of Palmyra, Aramean merchants developed revolutionary accounting systems, early ledgers tracking debts and shipments in a script so simple it could be learned quickly, a stark contrast to Mesopotamia's complex cuneiform. This practicality became their trademark. When Assyrian armies demanded tribute, Aramean city-states like Damascus often paid just enough to avoid destruction, then quietly rerouted trade to new partners. Survival wasn't about defiance, it was about flexibility. The genius of Aramaic lay in its accessibility. With just 22 letters, it was easier to master than Akkadian's 600 cuneiform signs, yet expressive enough to handle legal contracts or epic poetry. As empires rose and fell, Aramaic endured because it belonged to no single ruler. It belonged to the streets. Babylonian shopkeepers used it for receipts, Jewish exiles in Babylon wrote prayers in it, and Persian administrators dispatched orders in it from Susa to Sardis. Even after Greek became the elite language under Alexander, Aramaic persisted as the vernacular, the linguistic undercurrent that kept communities connected. Archaeology reveals how deeply Aramaic permeated culture. In the ruins of a remote Afghan trading post called Ai-Khanum, excavators found jars labeled in Aramaic alongside Greek, proof that a merchant halfway across the known world still relied on this nomadic tongue. The Dead Sea Scrolls, some of Judaism's most sacred texts, mix Hebrew with Aramaic passages, showing how the language became a vessel for faith. Most astonishingly, when Jesus spoke the parable of the prodigal son or cried out on the cross, he likely used Aramaic, a language born in desert encampments now echoing through the halls of history. The Arameans' true legacy isn't just in words, but in the idea that influence doesn't always come from conquest. Their script outlasted Assyria's palaces, Persia's throne rooms, even Rome's legions. Today, modern Syriac Aramaic's living descendant is still spoken in pockets of the Middle East, a whisper of resilience against the tide of time. The next time you hear someone say, abracadabra, an Aramaic phrase meaning, I create as I speak, remember, some kingdoms build with stone, but the Arameans built with syllables, and their construction never truly crumbled. The collapse of the Hittite Empire should have been the end, but in the rugged highlands of Syria and southern Turkey, fragments of its legacy refused to fade. These weren't just surviving outposts, they were reinventions. The Neo-Hittite states emerged like phoenixes from the ashes, their rulers still calling themselves great kings, even as they presided over territories a fraction of their ancestors' domain. What they lacked in size, they made up for in cultural audacity, blending imperial Hittite traditions with the vibrant influences of Arameans, Assyrians, and even Phoenicians to create something entirely new. Take the city of Carchemish, straddling the Euphrates like a sentinel between worlds. Walk its ruins today and you'll spot Hittite lions guarding gateways, but look closer. Those reliefs show Assyrian-style beards on the figures, Lewian hieroglyphs snaking around their borders, and Phoenician-inspired pommets framing the scenes. This wasn't cultural theft, it was alchemy. Even their gods underwent transformations. The storm god Tarhunt, once the Hittite Empire's protector, now appeared alongside Aramean deities like Hadad, his imagery fusing Anatolian power with Syrian symbolism. Their artistic renaissance is etched in stone, literally. At Alashia, a procession of gods marches across a basalt slab, their flowing robes and delicate features showing clear Assyrian influence, yet their poses echo the rigid formality of older Hittite art. Meanwhile, inscriptions tell of kings like Sapalulima of Carchemish, a deliberate echo of the great Hittite emperor's name, commissioning bilingual texts, Lewian hieroglyphs paired with Phoenician or Aramaic, a nod to the multilingual reality of their trade hubs. Why did these vibrant hybrids vanish from popular memory? Part of the answer lies in their precarious position. Squeezed between Assyria's expanding hunger and Egypt's intermittent ambitions, the Neo-Hittite states became masters of political tightrope walking. One ruler might pay tribute to Assyria while secretly funding rebellions further south. Another might marry his daughter to a rival dynasty to secure peace, only to reclaim the alliance through her children. Their diplomacy was brilliant, but ultimately no match for Assyria's relentless war machine. By the 8th century BCE, names like Kama and Gurgum survived only as Assyrian provincial labels. Yet their disappearance from history books speaks more to modern biases than ancient realities. Archaeologists once dismissed Neo-Hittite art as provincial or derivative, failing to see its innovation precisely because it defied neat categorization. Only recently have scholars recognized how these states preserved cuneiform literacy during the so-called Dark Ages, or how their metalworking techniques influenced later Phrygian and Eurasian masters. Even their downfall wasn't total. Some Neo-Hittite families resurfaced as Assyrian governors, their cultural DNA persisting in administrative practices and religious syncretism. The lesson of the Neo-Hittites isn't just about survival, it's about reinvention. They prove that collapse isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's a catalyst, forcing cultures to shed imperial trappings while preserving what matters most. Their monuments may lack the scale of Hattusa's grand temples, but in their intricate blend of traditions, we see the true heart of a civilization that refused to be defined by its fall. The stones of Carchemish still whisper their story if we're willing to listen beyond the footnotes of empires. Carchemish wasn't just a city, it was a living relic of the Hittite Empire's glory, clinging to power long after its parent civilization had crumbled. Perched on the western bank of the Euphrates, its walls rose like a defiant fist against the tides of history, commanding the crossroads between Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean. For 3 turbulent centuries after Hattusa's fall, this fortress city refused to fade, blending Hittite traditions with the vibrant influences of Aramean, Assyrian, and Phoenician neighbors to create a culture uniquely its own. What gave Carchemish its legendary resilience? Start with geography. The Euphrates wasn't just a water source, it was a moat and a highway, allowing the city to control trade routes while repelling invaders. Assyrian records grumble about Carchemish's impenetrable walls, but the real secret lay deeper. Excavations reveal a layered defense system, massive stone foundations from the Hittite Golden Age, reinforced by mudbrick ramparts and cleverly designed gates that forced attackers into deadly choke points. Yet physical fortifications were only half the story. Carchemish thrived because it mastered the art of cultural diplomacy. Its rulers, though proud heirs of Hittite blood, adopted Aramean mercenaries into their armies, married their daughters to Assyrian nobles, and let Phoenician artisans decorate their palaces. This wasn't surrender, it was survival through strategic assimilation. Walk through the ruins today, and you'll see this hybrid identity etched in stone. A colossal statue of the storm god Punt stands guard, his Hittite horned crown fused with Aramean-style curled hair and a Phoenician-inspired tunic. Nearby, bilingual inscriptions, Lewian hieroglyphs paired with Aramaic testify to a city that spoke many tongues. Even their famed royal buttress, a monumental terrace overlooking the river, served dual purposes, a symbol of imperial continuity for locals and a stage for dazzling foreign envoys with ceremonial processions. But Carchemish's golden age couldn't last forever. By the 8th century BCE, Assyria's hunger for expansion became insatiable. King Sargon II's annals boast of his siege in 717 BCE, but the truth was messier. Recent archaeology suggests Carchemish didn't fall in a single dramatic battle. It succumbed to a slow stranglehold. Assyrian governors choked off its trade routes, while repeated demands for tribute drained its coffers. The final blow came not from outside but within. Fragmentary tablets hint at a rebellion by Aramean factions tired of propping up a fading Hittite elite. Yet even in defeat, Carchemish left fingerprints on history. Its artisans, dispersed by conquest, brought Hittite Lewian motifs to Assyrian palaces. Its legal codes, blending imperial precedent with local customs, resurfaced in Neo-Babylonian edicts. Most poignant of all, a lone clay seal found in Nineveh depicts the last king of Carchemish, not as a prisoner but as an honored guest at Sargon's table. This was no mere conquest, it was the end of an era but also a quiet passing of the torch. The city's walls may have crumbled, but its spirit, adaptable, strategic, fiercely proud, lived on in the bones of every empire that followed. The Meads emerged from the rugged highlands of western Iran like a gathering storm, a people history almost forgot, yet whose influence would reshape the ancient world. Unlike the flashy empires that came before them, they left no towering ziggurats or boastful inscriptions. Instead, their power grew in the shadows, a quiet revolution that began with scattered tribes and ended with the toppling of Assyria, the most feared empire of its time. But who were these enigmatic rulers, and how did a people with no written records of their own become the architects of Persia's global dominance? Their rise was anything but inevitable. In the 9th century BC, the Meads were just one of many nomadic groups eking out a living in the Iranian plateau, paying tribute to the Assyrians when forced, retreating to their mountain strongholds when possible. What changed wasn't some sudden military genius, it was geography and grit. The Meads controlled the vital crossroads between Mesopotamia and Central Asia, where Assyrian armies marching east had to navigate narrow passes perfect for ambushes. Over generations, they turned these natural choke points into a web of resistance, forging alliances with other oppressed peoples like the Babylonians and Elamites. A cuneiform tablet from Assyria's King Sargon II complains of the distant Meads who know no overlord, revealing their growing defiance. Then came the spark that lit the fuse. In 612 BC, the Meads and Babylonians launched a coordinated assault on Nineveh, Assyria's glittering capital. The siege was brutal. Ancient sources describe rivers diverted to weaken the city's defenses, fires raging through palaces lined with alabaster reliefs. When the dust settled, the Meads didn't just sack Nineveh, they dismantled an empire that had terrorized the Near East for centuries. This wasn't mere revenge, it was a seismic shift in power dynamics. For the first time, the highland tribes weren't prey, they were the predators. Yet the Meads' true legacy lies not in destruction, but in what they built afterward. Their kingdom, though poorly documented, pioneered systems the Persians would later perfect. At Ecbatana, their rumored capital, modern-day Hamadan. Greek historians like Herodotus describe a fortified city of concentric walls, each painted a different color to represent celestial spheres, a cosmic blueprint for imperial rule. More concrete are the administrative innovations. Clay tablets from Babylon show Median officials using standardized weights and measures, while Assyrian refugees were surprisingly integrated into their bureaucracy, suggesting a pragmatic approach to governance. The greatest mystery is why such a pivotal civilization faded so completely. Later Persian sources, eager to legitimize Cyrus the Great's takeover, downplayed Median achievements, painting them as decadent rulers overthrown in a bloodless coup. But archaeology hints at a more complex truth. At sites like Godin Tepe, Median pottery styles evolve seamlessly into Persian forms, their distinctive animal motifs persisting for generations. Even the word magic derives from the Magi, Median priestly elites who retained influence under Persian rule. This wasn't a clean break, it was a slow merging, like tributaries feeding a river. Perhaps the Meads' most enduring lesson is how influence outlasts monuments. They proved that empires aren't built overnight, but through generations of resilience, adaptation, and unlikely alliances. When Cyrus finally unified Persia, he didn't start from scratch. He stood on the shoulders of the Median visionaries who first imagined a world beyond Assyria's shadow. Their story reminds us that history's quietest players often lay the strongest foundations. The Manians thrived in the shadow of giants, their kingdom nestled in the jagged mountains where modern Iran meets Iraq, a land of strategic passes and hidden valleys that became their greatest defense. While Assyrian annals dismiss them as just another troublesome tribe, archaeological discoveries reveal a society far more sophisticated than history's conquerors cared to admit. Their capital, Hassanlu, wasn't some rustic hill fort but a sprawling complex with paved streets, intricate drainage systems, and workshops producing bronze artifacts so finely crafted they rivaled anything from Nineveh or Babylon. A single gold bowl excavated from its ruins tells their story in miniature. Scenes of deities with Eurasian-style horned crowns standing beside Mesopotamian-inspired sacred trees, while warriors in distinctly Manian armor march below, a visual manifesto of cultural fusion. What set the Manians apart was their knack for turning precarious geography into opportunity. Sandwiched between the expansionist Assyrians to the west and the formidable Eurasians to the north, they became masters of the diplomatic tightrope. One year, they might supply Urartu with the iron ore needed for its legendary weapons. The next, they'd pay just enough tribute to Assyria to avoid invasion, all while quietly funneling intelligence between both sides. A clay tablet from the Assyrian king Sargon II complains about Manian merchants caught smuggling Eurasian iron into his territory, proof that their neutrality was often a carefully crafted illusion. Their religious practices reveal even deeper layers of adaptation. Excavations at sites like Kalachi uncovered temples where Mesopotamian Ishtar shared altar space with Eurasian storm gods, alongside local deities whose names survive only in fragmentary prayers. Most striking are the terracotta figurines of a mother goddess cradling a child, her face bearing the sharp, angular features of highland artistry rather than the smooth idealism of Mesopotamian or Eurasian styles. This wasn't haphazard borrowing, it was a deliberate synthesis, a spiritual language that reflected their identity as neither fully Mesopotamian nor wholly Eurasian, but something uniquely their own. The Manians' sudden disappearance from records around the 7th century BC has long puzzled scholars. Unlike neighboring kingdoms swallowed by Assyria's wars, their end came without dramatic sieges or burning palaces. The answer may lie in the soil. Core samples from Lake Urmia show catastrophic drought cycles precisely coinciding with their decline, suggesting an environmental collapse that emptied their grain stores and fractured tribal alliances. Yet even in dissolution, their legacy persisted. Persian administrative texts from centuries later still reference the Mani district, while their metalworking techniques resurface in Achaemenid artifacts. The Manians didn't so much vanish as dissolve into the cultural bloodstream of empires that followed. Their story a reminder that survival isn't always about conquest. Sometimes it's about leaving traces too subtle for history to erase. High in the rugged peaks of eastern Anatolia, where the air thins and the land bristles with natural defenses, the kingdom of Urartu carved its legacy into the very bones of the mountains. This wasn't just a refuge for shepherds or a scattering of hill forts. It was a hydraulic empire, a civilization that mastered water in ways that still astonish engineers today. Their capital, Tushpa, perched beside the sapphire waters of Lake Van, wasn't just a political center. It was the heart of a vast network of canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems that turned arid valleys into lush farmlands. One canal alone, stretching over 50 miles, funneled water from the Hoshap River to quench the thirst of distant fields, a Bronze Age marvel rivaling Rome's aqueduct centuries before they were built. But Urartu's true genius lay in its fortresses. These weren't mere walls, they were mountain crowns, their foundations fused to cliff faces so seamlessly they seemed grown from the rock itself. At sites like Savastep, double walls 16 feet thick enclosed granaries stocked with enough grain to withstand sieges for years, while hidden cisterns ensured water would never run dry. Assyrian inscriptions, usually brimming with boasts of conquest, grudgingly admit the impenetrability of Urartu's strongholds. One tablet from King Sargon II's reign describes his army struggling to scale the sheer heights where eagles dare not nest, only to retreat after months of futile siege. Yet for all its military prowess, Urartu's sudden collapse around the 6th century BCE remains one of antiquity's great whodunits. Climate science offers one clue. Pollen samples from Lake Van's sediments reveal a dramatic shift to drier conditions, crippling the agriculture that fed Urartu's armies. Then there's the archaeological smoking gun layers of ash at key sites like Teshubeni, suggesting coordinated attacks. But by whom? The usual suspects, Assyrians, Scythians, or even internal rebellions, all leave contradictory evidence. A cuneiform tablet from Urartu's last days speaks of strangers from the north, possibly Sumerian raiders, who exploited the kingdom's drought-weakened state. What makes Urartu's disappearance so haunting is how thoroughly its innovations outlived it. Their metalworking techniques, especially in bronze and iron, became the gold standard for later empires like the Meads and Persians. Even their architectural tricks, like using cyclopean masonry to earthquake-proof walls, reappear in fortresses across the Caucasus. Most poignant are the echoes of their language. Modern Armenian preserves traces of Urartian words, a linguistic ghost whispering across millennia. The lesson of Urartu isn't just about the fragility of power. It's about how civilizations leave fingerprints in unexpected places, in the curve of an irrigation ditch still watering fields today, in the syntax of a living language, in the stubborn stones of fortresses that refuse to fall completely. Their story challenges us to look beyond the binary of rise and fall, to see instead the quiet persistence of ideas, even when the hands that shaped them are long gone. The echoes of these lost kingdoms resonate far beyond their crumbling ruins. Their innovations weren't just ahead of their time, they became the invisible scaffolding of our modern world. Take the alphabet, born in the bustling scribble workshops of Ugarit. What began as 30 simple signs scratched onto clay tablets would evolve into the letters you're reading right now. a democratization of writing that shattered the monopoly of elite scribes. But their genius didn't stop there. The Aramaeans turned their language into the internet of the ancient Near East, a linguistic bridge connecting empires from Persia to Egypt, proving that communication could be mightier than conquest. Then there's the quiet revolution of governance. The Kassites, often overshadowed by Babylon's glamour, perfected the art of bureaucratic resilience. Their land grant tablets etched with intricate clauses protecting farmers' rights laid the groundwork for property laws still echoed in legal systems today. Meanwhile, the Mitanni didn't just wage war. They engineered diplomacy's golden age, crafting marriage alliances so effective that 3,000 years later, modern treaties still borrow from their playbook. Even the humble contract, that backbone of commerce, owes its lineage to Elamite merchants who pioneered clauses safeguarding women's inheritance rights centuries before Hammurabi's code. What's startling is how these civilizations mastered sustainability long before it became a buzzword. The Eurasians' mountain-fusing aqueducts didn't just defy gravity. They transformed arid valleys into breadbaskets using techniques now studied by drought-stricken regions. The Lewians' decentralized alliances offer a blueprint for resilience in our age of climate chaos, proving that survival often hinges on flexibility, not fortress walls. And let's not forget the Manians, whose hybrid deities and multilingual trade networks modeled cultural coexistence in a world increasingly fractured by borders. Remembering these kingdoms isn't just about correcting historical omissions, it's about reclaiming lost wisdom. In an era obsessed with monolithic superpowers, their stories remind us that progress rarely springs from a single source. It's woven from countless threads, some celebrated, others buried beneath desert sands. When we overlook these forgotten innovators, we don't just distort the past, we impoverish our toolkit for the future. Their legacies whisper a crucial truth. Civilization isn't a straight line of triumph, but a mosaic of experiments, failures, and quiet revolutions that deserve more than a footnote. The next time you sign a contract, trace a letter, or turn on a tap, pause and listen. You might just hear the distant echoes of empires you never knew shaped your world. Beneath layers of sand and centuries of neglect, the lost kingdoms between Egypt and Mesopotamia are finally speaking again, not through ancient texts, but through the silent language of soil, stone, and cutting-edge technology. Modern archaeology isn't just filling gaps in history, it's rewriting entire chapters. Take LiDAR, for example. This laser mapping tool has peeled back dense forests and shifting dunes to reveal the outlines of cities no modern eye has ever seen. In the Sudanian desert, what was once assumed to be empty wilderness now shows grids of streets and the faint footprints of palaces, hinting at Yam's elusive heartland. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar in Turkey's highlands has uncovered Urartu's hidden canals, their precise engineering putting modern irrigation projects to shame. But it's not just about flashy tech. A humble trowel in the right hands can overturn centuries of assumptions. At Tel Mosin, the ancient Hurrian city of Urkesh, archaeologists brushing away dirt uncovered a royal seal, not just any seal, but one belonging to a queen named Akhenaten. Her existence, previously unknown, forced scholars to reconsider women's roles in Bronze Age politics. Similarly, in Cyprus, a farmer's plow striking a copper ingot led to the rediscovery of Alashiya's sprawling trade networks, proving this wasn't just a minor island kingdom, but a linchpin of Bronze Age economics. The real game changer, though, is biomolecular archaeology. DNA extracted from a single Philistine skull in Ashkelon traced their origins to southern Europe, while isotope analysis of teeth from Ugarit's ruins revealed merchants who'd traveled from as far as the Baltic. Even pottery shards, once catalogued and forgotten, now speak volumes through residue analysis, revealing traces of olive oil from Kizuwatna or vanilla-laced wine from Mitanni, luxury goods traded across continents. Every discovery unravels old biases. For decades, historians dismissed smaller kingdoms like the Manians or Neo-Hittite states as backwaters. But newly deciphered tablets from Carchemish detail treaties negotiated as equals with Assyria, while metallurgical studies proved the Manians' ironwork rivaled anything from Nineveh. The biggest surprise, how interconnected these forgotten cultures were. Aramid fibers found in Egyptian mummies trace back to Elamite workshops, and Lewian hieroglyphs scribbled on Aegean pottery suggest scribes exchanged ideas across the Mediterranean. The sands still hold countless secrets. Satellite imagery hints at undiscovered temples near Mari, and underwater robots are mapping sunken ports that could rewrite trade routes. But the most thrilling prospect isn't just finding new cities, it's hearing their stories without the filter of conquerors' propaganda. With every scan, dig, and lab test, these lost kingdoms reclaim their voice, reminding us that history isn't a tale of lone superpowers, but a chorus of diverse civilizations whose echoes still shape our world. The lost kingdoms between Egypt and Mesopotamia whisper a truth we often forget: history isn't just written by victors, but also buried with the vanquished. These civilizations didn't fail because they were insignificant. They vanished into the shadows of grander narratives, their stories overshadowed by the noise of empires. Yet in their quiet resilience, we find lessons that echo across millennia. The Mitanni didn't just fall to the Hittites, they left behind diplomatic blueprints that still influence international relations. The Kassites didn't merely occupy Babylon, they sustained its culture for centuries without erasing its past. These weren't footnotes, they were masterclasses in adaptation. Consider the irony. Today's archaeologists wielding satellite imaging and DNA analysis are becoming the scribes these kingdoms never had, reconstructing their legacies from shattered pottery and faded inscriptions. At Tel Brak in Syria, a single tablet revealed a forgotten queen of the Hurrians, her name Pisagara, rescued from oblivion after 3,000 years. In Sudan, climate researchers studying ancient riverbeds accidentally mapped the trade routes of Yam, proving its wealth wasn't myth but meticulous logistics. Every discovery chips away at the illusion that history is a straight line of dominant powers, revealing instead a web of interconnected cultures, each contributing threads to the tapestry of human progress. What makes these lost kingdoms so vital isn't just their rediscovery, it's the humility they demand of us. Their ruins whisper that collapse isn't always an end, but often a transformation. The Aramaeans' language outlived their cities, woven into the Lord's Prayer. Urartu's canals still water modern farms, their engineering untouched by time. Even the Philistines, long cast as villains, gifted us the ancestor of the alphabet we use today. Their stories force us to ask, how much of our own world is built on foundations we've forgotten to credit? As the sands yield new secrets, a merchant's ledger in Ugarit, a soldier's letter in Carchemish, we're reminded that history isn't static. It breathes, shifts, and waits for those willing to listen. The next breakthrough might lie in an unread tablet, a buried shipwreck, or the genetic memory of a living descendant. These kingdoms challenge us to look beyond the spotlight of pyramids and ziggurats to the spaces between where real people traded, loved, and dreamed. Their greatest legacy isn't just what they built, but the questions they leave us to ponder. Who else have we overlooked? And what might their stories teach us about resilience in our own uncertain age?